I was going to say something, but I'm glad I didn't. Good morning.
Hi, everyone. How are you? So, we are live right now and we are going to be discussing presence. So, this is a part of Amana Bible Institute's series called Hashtag Presence Matters. And this particular episode is called You Present or Nah. I imagine these will go differently every single time we have a session. We do have quite a few sessions, maybe 5 or 6, that are part of this series. And I imagine sometimes you guys will get something that's a little bit more formal, and sometimes you'll get something that's a little less formal. Today, you're going to definitely get something that's informal. We want you to chime in. We want you to engage in conversation and help us teach this. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'm going to allow Professor Onika to introduce herself, and we're just going to get on in it. While Professor Onika introduces herself, I'm going to go ahead and share to all of our other pages. So please do help us out. Share the webinar, let people know we're live. And if you'd like, go ahead and click on that link in the detail or the box there, the detailed description box, and come on into the live webinar. It's free of charge. You just need to RSVP on our website. So I'm Latoya Leary. I'm the founder and president of Amana Bible Institute, and this institution has been around since 2016. Really centered institute, and more so centered on freedom of thought, the willingness and the need to actively ask questions, and really also centered on topics like this. We really want to make the Bible accessible to people, not just by getting you to learn biblical languages and getting you to understand the social and cultural context of the text, but we also want you to understand how it's relevant to you. And I think this series is a great example as to its relevance. This series is all about you, it's all about the human, and the Bible is filled with texts that really emphasize the need for people to have active presence. So I'm going to go ahead and let Professor Onika introduce herself to you.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited, as always, to join you guys, and especially when we have these webinars, you get a sense of who we are as individuals. You get a sense of who we are as instructors, and it is our pleasure to come to you and to bridge the gap that we sometimes encounter when we're on our learning journey. So, as an instructor here at Amana, I primarily teach Bible classes in the New Testament, Greek, and prayer in particular. I love to emphasize prayer because I see myself as a prayer coach and mentor. And here at Amana, I teach courses on spiritual warfare, understanding prayer, Greek, Pauline epistles, you name it. We have a class for it here. And it is my pleasure to not only be an instructor, but to mentor, to train, to help others come to the place of understanding what they believe and how to articulate that. Primarily, also, I'm very interested as a personal mandate, and I think personal and ministerial mandate to deconstruct ideas and myths concerning prayer and how we experience our prayer lives and prayer practice in the earth today, and to help persons develop their prayer identity. And I think that lends itself to every other area of our lives. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of get out of the way. We encourage you to come join us on these various journeys that we're on. It's all a learning journey, but your road or your path may take different, it may branch off at various points, but it is our goal to bring you to the table where you determine what you want to feast on. And as we do that and we learn and we grow together, it is our pleasure to be your pathway to progress. So join us not only on this webinar, but on other webinars. Sign up for one of our classes. We will do you good on your journey. My pastor has often said this, and I've stolen this from him. but I believe that the process of learning is a journey, and it should be a fun journey. And that's what we embody here at Amana. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We hope to impart, we hope to share with you today something that you have not maybe thought of before, but something that may be clarified that you may have thought of before. So I hope you engage. I hope you have lots of questions, because we do too. Let's go, Toria.
So, first question, what is presence?
You can't just throw that question out. You got to give us something to work with. You tell me.
Well, I mean, often I think people's idea of presence is kind of like showing up, you know, my body is somewhere, I exist somewhere, and therefore I'm present. But I actually think that's a really falsified presence that I often call a pseudo presence. It doesn't really, it doesn't suggest that there's any bit of active community, active fellowship at work. And without active community, without active presence, it makes it really hard for any of us to be able to gain or properly give in relationships.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
So I tend to agree somewhat. I think presence, or being present, the act of being present, is not only just a physical presence, but it's how you're present, right? So how you're engaging with the people, the places, the things that are around you in those particular moments in time. It's being active, as you have already kind of defined presence, or I should say positive presence. I would call it positive presence. It's an active thing. It's a verb, right? It's where you do, where you're engaged with, where you are initiating, and then there begins to be some kind of exchange that takes place, right? For pseudo presence, as you've kind of articulated, is this, it's kind of one-sided. You are there perhaps bodily, but you're missing some elements of that. So with positive or active presence, you are actually there, present in mind, present in body, perhaps present in spirit, experiencing, engaging with persons, individuals, entities, perhaps that are in that particular moment, in those particular moments in time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think while the tendency is to convince people as to why we need to be actively present, why we need to have positive presence, as you put it, there's a tendency to talk to people about, you know, who they are. And I certainly want to go through that kind of stuff, like who we are as human beings, how we're made up, and why this necessitates active presence. But I think maybe first we should talk about the causes of pseudo presence. Like why are we inclined to just show up to places and to not actively give or actively take or to actively exist in spaces?
Mm-hmm. So can I say something here? Something comes to mind as we're talking about positive or active presence. And what I'm thinking about too is that oftentimes we think about presence as somebody doing a work or something. And I don't know, I'd like to push the boundaries against that and actually suggest that active presence does not only mean or indicate that a person is physically doing something to be actively present. So there are ways of being actively or positively present, right? That where you can engage in those moments of time with people, et cetera, without like doing something physical. And I hope that's something that's included in your talk today, because I think that's super important, because a lot of times people get how should I put it? They might be seen negatively, right? If they are not doing something physical or something tangible, right? By our standards, human standards, where we have to see them moving the microphone or moving a desk or running around whatever institution we're running around in order to indicate that that person is actively present. But I know so many people, myself included, I have shown up time and again and not been actively or positively present. So let's talk about pseudo presence and what that looks like. And perhaps maybe somewhere in your discussion, we talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah, so there is a part of my notes, my really scattered notes, because this is meant to be like an informal conversation. I want all of you out there to join us, ask questions, make comments, help us teach this. But I do have a part of my notes that's specifically on how to be present. And most of these things, these notes that are here, focus on active presence without actually like physically doing something. I think there's a tendency to suggest that people aren't being productive to a work because their name isn't on the docket, because they're not on the service, schedule to pray or to lead worship or something of that nature. But you can be actively present, for example, in a church service just by simply coming and coming with intentions and utilizing, working through those intentions in your own little space. So yeah, there's definitely a portion on that. So I think pseudo presence is really, really easy for all of us to, you know, um, take part in. And I think, especially for us in the West, and I'll just speak specifically for Americans, this is, I believe, the case for most of us in the West, but there are some Western countries that are a little bit more, if I can use this term, they are advancing. They are doing things like thinking critically about emotional intelligence and things of that nature, which is a part of active presence. They're actually working on what I would consider to be a part of the bubble of presence itself. But, here in this country, we are very money driven. We work because our jobs give us money. And if we don't make money, we don't eat. So we connect, doing good for people, caring for people by what we can give them, by what we can offer them, by how we can care for them. And sometimes it doesn't really work. It's not really, you can't quite be present even though you're giving me things if you're not actually present, right? So I think a good example of this is it occurs all the time in impoverished communities, and it's certainly the system working against various people who sit in various margins. But the working single mom who has 2 or 3 jobs to take care of her children, she's literally not present at home, right? She's literally not present, but she is in so many ways arguing for her presence on account of her family having a place to lay their heads, food on the table, a means to go to school. You get all that stuff you need that you want at school, on account of the money. And like I said, this is unfortunate, and it's a system working against the marginalized, but it is probably one of the, best examples that I could think of, to when thinking through how the system itself in America works against our ability to actively present ourselves in spaces. So the money driven type of action, even if the money driven action is filled with care, the dog eat dog world kind of thing, the whole competitiveness. We're super competitive. We're taught to be competitive. We're taught to be the best. One of my dads is super big on being the best that he could be in his field, and he will sit there in that same field for decades as long as he can be the best. And that's just how his mentality is. But it is a very American way to think about things. It really is. But also that kind of selfishness, and sometimes selfishness extends towards our immediate family or our smaller friend group. Like we're jealous for them too, selfish on behalf of them as well. And so we can show up when it's for us, we can show up when it's for them, but when it's for everyone on the outside, we're not present. And that is a huge issue because humans have huge connections to other aspects of creation, and our society will never get better if we don't actually show up, especially for people that we do not know, entities of creation that we're unconscious of, and so on and so forth. What do you think, Onika?
You this is a lot of food for thought here. To be honest, one of the things that this kind of triggers for me, or kind of highlights, maybe I should use the word highlight instead, because triggering sometimes it seems has like some negative or different connotations attached to it, but highlights for me this idea when you were talking about the mom who is really not present at home, the single mom who's really not present at home because she's doing all these other things, or she's present, right? Positively present in other ways, right? That we don't even consider presence, right? And so for me, we don't consider that as being present, because ideally, I mean, the children in a single parent home, they need their parent to be present at work and to show up, or to be present when it comes to providing a roof over their heads, providing maybe access to school, whatever that looks like, right? That's super important for those children. And they probably don't recognize that as a way of being present, because we have some, whether it be undefined, whether it be subconscious, societal expectations of what presence looks like. And I'm thinking about the fact that our roles as individuals require, or perhaps have unwritten expectations as it relates to what presence looks like. So as we're talking about presence, right? We're saying, or we're talking about active presence, or which right now you're talking about pseudo presence. I think it's super important for us to define, or to point out maybe that sometimes the roles that we are designated require or have different definitions of what presence is. And that's what really comes to mind as I hear you talking about that. So is there a need for us to really figure out what presence looks like based on where we function, how we function, or where we're called to function, etc. Like those are the things that I'm thinking as I hear you talk about pseudo presence. Does that make sense? So then I would think about, or I'm thinking about, is it really pseudo presence, or is it that we haven't really been made aware about how to show up in those various spaces? Those are just thoughts I'm having. Not that I'm saying that this is a thing. I'm just thinking, is it pseudo presence if we haven't been taught, or we haven't been made aware of how, or what the expectations are, or ways that we can show up or be present? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, because I don't think we ever really talk about actually like what it means to show up to things outside of obligatory actions, or outside of designations given over to people who occupy certain roles. So one of the things that comes to mind, for example, when I think about this unfortunate situation with women who are, in the margins, and the system is working against them, is, what we find on television, what we find in literature here in the West encourages the, trope in so many ways of the nurturing mother, right? And so the nurturing mother is more than that woman who provides, right? Because technically dad is providing, right? So we still have this kind of like 50s, way of thinking about what makes a good nurturing mom. And so I think because we're still kind of reared in that ideology, what happens in the home, of children who are having to deal with this is, that comparison. My friend's mom does this, right? That whole kind of thing. And I think when you're in the tunnel, you're in the storm, you only see this one thing. When you're at home, it's very easy to suggest, or to think of this as something that would be, insufficient. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a tough situation to be in, because in some ways it is insufficient, but in other ways it's the most sufficient thing a mom in the margins can do for her child, really, or her children. She's working with every single bone that she has, which is so much a definition of a mother. I think in one way or another, this leads to, or should probably lead to, other conversations about what social constructions do to us, what ideologies, how they impact how we think through things like presence. But yeah, I think I use this example as an extreme example, but maybe we need a less extreme example. Maybe we just need the example of the business person making money for his or her family, you know, and the business person who has to take their work home, right? In order to make that kind of money for his family, you know? And this business person might be very well off, you know, but the idea is that they have to continue to be well off, right? They have to compete with everyone else in the area, with their competitors. And in one way or another, what should probably be 30 minutes at least away from your work to spend time with your family is, you know, no, I got to answer this email. This might be an important conversation for people like us to have because we are business owners. But in addition to this, we're Bible scholars, and Bible scholars take their work home all the time. So how I think maybe working off of maybe a less charged example would be better.
So you know what? I beg to differ a little bit, because I think your example, I think it's perfect, at least for me, from my perspective, because it's new within the last, how many, 60, 70 years. Women have taken on roles that we hadn't seen them before, right? Like in the 1950s, 30s, whatever. We hadn't seen them in those particular roles. So it's definitely different from a single mom's perspective. But I don't think it's too much of a complex example. I think it's one of the kind of examples that we would need when we're considering things like presence, because so then for me it brings to mind this question or idea: is presence supposed to be something that's, or can we consider presence on a more individual level? What does presence look like for Onika? What does presence look like for Onika, not just for Onika as an instructor? What does presence look like for Onika as X on her job? What does presence look like for Onika as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother, whatever that looks like, right? So are there individual notions to presence, right? And I think, because I think presence is connected directly to our identity, I strongly believe that there are some individualistic notions to it, but that it is connected to the larger community to which we're called to serve. So I'm asking two questions. What do you think? I'm throwing things back at you. Do you think presence is an individual thing? And then if it is an individual thing, or if it's not, how then does it relate to, how does it mingle with or interlock with this idea of creating community? What does that look like?
So I think, like everything, when we're defining this stuff, we have to think about how we would define this stuff individually and how we have to define this stuff, or how we might want to think about these things corporately. I do think that there are aspects of just the human in general that requires or necessitates conversations on what presence is for humanity more broadly. And then there are deeper conversations that we need to have on in specifically within our smaller communities, and then within our own selves on what presence might look like there, right? Like, I think that there is a decorum even to institutions where presence might look differently, you know, when you go into a bank, for example, than when you go into a church, you know. But I also agree that, you know, the various identifiers or designations, personal designations that we might have, might also necessitate a different way of existing, actively existing in those spaces.
So what is interesting about your breakdown is that you started from the macro level, right? From the level of humanity, and then societal structure, and then individuality. And what's interesting is that from my perspective, and it might be a both and. I'm thinking that this idea of presence needs to work from the opposite end, from an individual perspective, right? Lending itself or leaning into our societal structure, right? And then, of course, all humanity. I think there needs to be like a working both and, right? So working from both ends in terms of being able to not only understand what that is, but being able to execute, being able to act out what we think presence is. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think that there are people in the world who see things micro and then it expands into this kind of macro kind of thing. And then there are other people in the world who have this bigger picture and then have to scale down. I think I've always been this bigger picture kind of macro like thinker. I mean, you've known me for years, so you can probably confirm this or not. But I often start really, really broadly. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, then what do I do individually to ensure that this is happening in my life and in the larger scheme of things, if that makes any sense? So I'm even looking at my notes, for example, of why I think presence is important and discussions like this is important. And the first sentence on my paper is, presence is important due to its relation to the core of who we are. I'm thinking of the whole like human shebang. Like, this is important because the human, right? It's central to the human and how we think through the human. I can imagine your notes would look really different.
So you're right. I'm working from the other end, and so in my mind, because we're also prophetic people, right? I'm also thinking about, I don't know, a call just came in, so I don't know if you missed me there for a couple seconds, but from my perspective, I'm working the other way. I think I see it as a concentric kind of circle thing happening, where I'm seeing that this individual, like honing this particular person, honing or drilling down to Onika, starting with her, right? And helping her to figure out her identity, her physical identity, her spiritual identity, intellectual, her IQ in terms of intelligence, quotient, emotionally, spiritually, etc. All of that kind of stuff. Her presence quotient, right? We're throwing out all kinds of terms here that we're creating or we're kind of coming up with, but doing all of that with her. And I think that lends itself, because it doesn't matter. She's connected to humankind, that whatever we do with her, how we mold her, how we help her to become her full self, will ultimately impact the rest of everything, right? So, but I also think because of what we're dealing with, because we already have some structures in place in terms of societal structures, etc., that there has to be a working from the other side as well, right? Because we have to be thinking about, so it's not, I don't think it's wrong, but I think it's amazing that you're on that end and I'm on this end. And I think that's exactly what needs to be, because there's going to be some kind of meeting in the middle, right, as it relates to presence. But I think that's a healthy perspective on what presence is. It also lends itself to this idea that there's no one formula. There's no one approach. There's no one perspective that is the golden key to solving or to transforming how we are as people, human beings. But there are multiple that are positive, and we need to think about how to make room for all of those different things, because I think each and every aspect can have very positive impact on what it is we believe that Spirit is leading us to do and to be in the earth.
Yeah, sadly, I'm also, it's not sad, but I'm also thinking about that pyramid we created. Well, I created for all these webinars that fit within this series. It all starts really macro and then goes all the way like micro. Like, I think our last webinar, for example, in this series is all about, what is it? I think it's maintaining presence in prophetic encounters. So it's super personal. Like, it goes all the way to the individual. So it is really, really interesting. And I agree. I think it both and is certainly what's important. So let's go into why presence is important. And I guess I'll like mention some things from my very macro way, and then you can mention some things from your, micro moving upwards to the macro kind of way, and people will be better for, both. So I always start off just thinking about who the human is, and humans are really complex beings, multiple checkpoints, right? There are multiple things that cause us to move and work, outside of the body and within the body. So we're spirit beings. Spirit beings thrive off of connection. Spirit doesn't thrive off of breath like our bodies do, but more so about making connection with other spirit beings. That is how spirit kind of moves and kind of acts and kind of thrives in so many ways. But these multiple checkpoints include more than just spirit. They include aspects of our heart, our mind, our body, our past memory. So things that can be related to our souls, but also our expectancies, our needs, our desires, right? All of these things that we connect to the soul as well. And then, of course, I get even more macro because, in my own personal talks on, things in my life on Facebook Live, one of the things I said in the sexuality talk, I discussed, just briefly some spiritual violations that occur in sex or sexuality. And I mentioned that the question of consent is a larger matter. And I think it's a larger matter because it's all related to active presence. Like it's all related to every part of you, like actively presenting itself in a space, in a situation. And when that doesn't happen, there's a question of consent. There's confusion there, internal confusion, and that causes violations. That might be different. It might be different for me than it is for other people. It's meant to be different. It's meant to be individual. What violates us will differ, but how they occur, I think is pretty common. It's pretty it's pretty similar, this kind of battling of the wills inside of a person, inside of these very complex human people. And I think often there's this, because we often move off of obligation or out of, the need to satisfy human needs. We must eat, therefore we must make money. We need a place to live, therefore we must have money to pay for rent, things of that nature. We're often moving out of necessity. We go to places, with some kind of very surface or superficial intention. And sometimes we go to spaces without any intention at all outside of having an obligation. And I think this is often how people go to church. I go to church, like not me personally, but people go to church because we're supposed to go to church. We're told this is what we do. This is how we fellowship. This is what the Bible tells us to do. And so we just simply go. We go without intentions. We go without expectations. We just simply go and then we leave. I think presence in so many ways, as it is core to our being, requires that we do some work. And while it doesn't have to be physical work, it certainly needs to be internal work that I think needs to start off with having active intentions. What are your thoughts? Any thoughts out there on Facebook?
Oh yeah, that's good. We forgot we had people hanging out with us. We were just talking amongst ourselves.
My aunt said, yes, big then small for you.
Huh? What'd you say?
My aunt said, yes, big then small for you.
Big then small for you, right? Yeah. And I think it's important to have that. So yeah, I don't think anything's wrong with it. Maybe I need to think bigger, but I think we need both kinds of people in the world, right?
I do.
Mm-hmm. So what is your question again? Ask me again, because
no, I want to know what your thoughts are about this, like these more larger things related to our person as humans, and why presence is necessary, and whether you have some kind of more smaller and then bigger ways to think about it. Since we're approaching in two different ways.
That's a good question. The why presence is necessary part, because that's the first thing I jotted down. when you talked about this. Why is it important to be, and here I am again with this positive presence, because I don't know if you clearly can tell that I'm thinking that there are positive ways to be present and there are negative ways to be present, right?
Yeah.
And negative ways, let me say what I think negative would be. And I'm not saying like it's demonic or, I'm not trying to be super spiritual, but I'm saying there are negative ways to be present in when it does not, when it doesn't move you forward as an individual, when it doesn't move your purpose forward, when it doesn't move you forward with regards to your own goals or the goals of the institutions that you're connected with, right? I think that there are times when presence becomes a negative thing. So for example, let's say you're on a job and you're getting ready to start another job. There is a point, right, before your release. I believe there are some people, there's a point before you move on to that next place where your presence in the current state, it becomes negligible in that you're either checking out or you checked out, right? And you're not contributing. Just you might be showing up, but you're not engaging, you're not contributing, you're not trying to move anything forward. Things are just stagnant. And for me, that becomes negative presence. So that's my example of negative presence. Positive presence for me is this idea of moving things forward. They might not seem like they're moving, but you're putting pieces in place to move the whole thing forward. So why is it important to be present? It's important to be present, and from my perspective, especially as a minister of word, as an instructor, more importantly, as a person of prayer, it's important for me to show up and it's important for you to show up or to be positively present, because when you are not, there's a gaping hole. Because I believe in God's idea of creation, that we all fit into this place and space that moves the creation forward, right? And when we're not there, or when we don't actively involve or engage or bring ourselves to the fore, I think we're cheating those we're called to. I think we're cheating ourselves in our purpose, right? And we don't move anything forward, but we actually cause things to stand still. We're just standing there, and I'm not entirely sure that's what we're called to do or to be. For me, for example, if I am not, so as a person of prayer, and even in the ministry to which I'm connected, as a person of prayer, I have seen that when I don't show up, or if I don't show up, that there are elements of that particular thing that I'm connected to that don't function, they don't move forward. And it's not to think more highly of myself than I ought to think, because that's not it. But because I understand who I'm called to be, and when I'm plugged into a particular place, who I am called to be works, that if this is not working, if I'm not working it, if I'm not turning the key or in the ignition, then the car is not really wholly going anywhere. None of the parts of the pieces are moving the way that it should. It's still a car, still full of gas, still have all the things intact. It's a nice brand new car, but I'm not pushing the button that says start the engine, right? So that's my thought in terms of presence. Not being present wholly or positively or actively, it's like the shut off key, or it's like the end button. It stops everything in time. And while we continue, or those things continue to exist, there's no forward movement. There's no progress, so to speak. And those are just my personal thoughts on the purpose of presence, active or positive presence.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. I think my other way of thinking about it, like the macro way of thinking about it, thinks about like what happens when you don't help someone plug into an outlet, if that makes any sense. Then they're the one receiving all of the charge, or having to put in all of the work, kind of thing. And then it results in some kind of lack or depletion. And I think that's probably how our ways of thinking about it kind of meet. Like, there's no forward movement because, because there's some form of emptiness that's there or that's at work. And I think that the way in my mind that this all makes sense is in thinking through how we live in an ecosystem as humans. We are nothing without the earth and the creatures of the earth. We can't exist, for example, without the plants and without the vegetation, without the plant life out there. They are breathing out, releasing the very oxygen that we need to breathe in, and we are releasing the carbon dioxide that they require to exist as well. They need us and we need them. Walking around with negative or pseudo presence really just in so many ways, it causes us to ignore that something else needs us, and it deprives in so many ways those other people, those other institutions, those other aspects of creation of the thing that they need from us. That's kind of like often how I think about it. And I think I arrived to this, conclusion that we have a huge presence issue as humans, because I started having issue with presence myself. Like, I think, humans, we already have this presence issue. And then we bring in digital stuff, and then we have an excuse to be less present. And then you bring in like prophetic stuff, and that challenges you to think through your presence in even deeper ways. And that's pretty much what happened for me. Like, having so many prophetic encounters really caused me to realize that, in some ways I totally clock out. I almost act as if I am some kind of blank screen that is being played upon, but that's not quite what's happening. All of these things that are occurring for me to actively engage with. I'm meant to be active in my encounters, not unplugged and just kind of, zombie-ish watching it all happen. And this kind of forced me to think about this larger picture, which I think, because we're almost out of time, I think should bring us to, giving you guys some tips on how to work through your presence. So I've already mentioned like some connections with humans and the earth, this idea that we are in an ecosystem. The Bible is full of references to this. The creation of humans in Genesis chapter 1, right? The parallelism between what's happening on day 1 and what happens on day 3, the creation of light, or what happens on day 4. The creation of light in day 1, on day 4, the creation of the things that go in the light, on day 2, the separation of the domes, and, this kind of creation of the sea. And then on day 5, everything that goes into the sea is created. And then on day 3, we finally see earth, right? There's the creation of dry land. And then on day 6, everything that lives on the land is created, animals and humans. We find a similar thing happening in Genesis chapter 2, where Ha-Adam, not Adam, but the human being, is created from the dust, from the Adamah. This is how we get the name Adam. This is how we get, the human in Hebrew, Adam. It is the person, it's the earth man, the earth being, the thing that is created from the earth. Right? And that happens in Genesis chapter 2, like this constant connection there. In Genesis chapter 3, this idea that when the human lifespan is up, we're going to return to the dust. We find that once again in Psalms 146. Same idea, that there's this constant connection and this constant cycle, this constant ecosystem that is there, where life, and death are heavily connected. And you can even see this in the book of Leviticus, with all of these rules and laws and taboos against things like menstruation, what happens when a woman gives birth, and also genital discharges. It's all connected to this endless cycle of life and death. So the Bible affirms this in a lot of ways, if you needed a Bible example. But now to the tips. I have a very practical tip here. Focus on the task at hand. Remove your distractions. Focus on the task at hand. You want to give a tip, Onika?
Those are all the tips you have? Focus on the task.
I have more.
No, go ahead. I have more. I'm going to give you some more, and I'll come in the back on the back end if I have any. I'm not sure I do, but focus on the task at hand is more my arena, because that's more more. That's more the individual side, at least I think. Right. But go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, so my next tip is be intentional about where you are going, why you are going there, and what you expect to get there, right? And this could be like an institutional space. It can be a space like church, but it could also be, an internal space. When you're going to go meditate, for example, where am I going? Why am I going there? What do I expect to get out of this activity? When you're going to work, where am I going? Why am I going? What do I expect to get out of this? And actively work towards receiving what you expect. My third tip is regular self-examination. Contemplation matters. Contemplation needs to happen. There's all of these amazing philosophical works, especially by Philo. He writes one on the contemplative life. And I'm all up that alley. I think we need contemplation. We need to teach people more about self-examination and being self-critical in positive ways. Number 4, be sure to think about all of the matters concerned with human connectedness, right? So this is the more macro tip, in connectedness. We are connected to other humans, right? We have to think about those other humans, those people that we know, and those people that we don't know, right? But we're also connected to institutions, institutions that we're fully aware of and institutions we're not fully aware of. A lot of people, for example, will watch certain TV shows not even knowing that the institution they're really supporting is Disney. Like, there's a larger picture to all of this, you might not think that you're supporting Disney when you support, ABC or something like that, but you are. There's always a larger picture. Figure it out. And it's not always essential to know, these larger pictures as well. But sometimes it does make a huge difference. Just remember that your connectedness to something does impact larger institutions and larger groups of people. And this includes our connectedness to plant life, which I've discussed, and animal life. All of that depends on us, in so many ways, and vice versa. Their health impacts our health impacts their health. If there's, for example, a famine or a drought in the land, you read about this in the Bible, you read it, you watch it on these shows that show us like these antique versions of what's happened in Nigeria or something like that. Watch those old Nigerian films or something. Droughts and famines had huge impacts to humans. Right? Nowadays we hear that there's a water drought and none of us shake. We probably should, though. We should minimize our water use because this does impact human livelihood. But we're so privileged here in the West that none of us shiver when we hear that there's a food shortage or a water shortage. We should be acting like the people who don't hoarded gas. Which is less of an issue. But there is actually a real life food shortage in this country and in other countries. There's a shortage of chicken now, and there really truly is a shortage of water in several states here in the United States. So we need to be more mindful. My next tip, remember, we live in an ecosystem. Every single action impacts the other. The cycle itself will always include the cycle that is connected to life, that includes our breathing. Like if you're trying to cut off all the trees because you want to build bigger buildings and stuff, you're impacting your own breath. Like that's the kind of thoughts that we need to have, which is kind of connected to my last point. But yeah, those are my tips. What do you got?
So unfortunately I'm not as gracious as you with all of these tips. I think they're wonderful, and I think they're very practical. Um and I think the overarching theme when we're giving these tips is really recognizing the interconnectedness, right, of all that is living, all that has life, and the cycle of life, right? It's super important to really, my thing would be to draw the lines, the lines of intersection, draw the lines of your own life and how you connect to other people. And when I say draw, for some of you that might mean an artistic drawing, something visual, but for others it might be a mental drawing of to understand, okay, all the ways your life is connected to other people, all the ways your life might be connected to institutions, all the ways your life is connected to the earth, and all that we get to experience on earth as humankind. So I think all of those kind of lumped into one really kind of helps to demonstrate or give us this kind of general picture of the fact that we are all connected, all intricately connected to each other and to this earth that we have been placed on. So I think those are sufficient and enough for us to get started. If we've never thought about presence and why it matters, if we haven't thought about our own presence, if you don't see yourself as valuable, I think it's super important to as you listen to this webinar, as you listen to these dialogical exchanges, that you understand that your purpose and your place in the world is super important, that we need you. You are needed, you are necessary, right? You're not here just as an arbitrary thought, but you are a strategic thought, and you are strategically placed, and you are needed. So I want you to hear us say that as we leave this webinar, how important you are, and really really discovering that, really peeling back the layers to how you impact everything that happens around you, in and around your life, is super important. So we want to encourage you on that journey of discovery. I want to encourage you on the journey of identity discovery, because I think presence is definitely connected to identity. So here's what you need to do. You need to take a class with Amana, because that's what we do here. We're excited to plug you in and to get connected with you on your journey so that we can help you along the way. That was good, Toya. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that note, I do want to mention his Facebook comment. That's great. My aunt, Benita Fussell Pouncey, said sometimes being still in positive presence is there to help you to enable transitioning forward. I think this is a good note. Sometimes we so quickly run through life that we don't actually take the time to just simply, sit. And I think that is just as much an aspect of presence as anything else is. So I do want to go off of Professor Onika's note and point you to our website, because we do have some classes starting in just 2 weeks, and they're exciting courses. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you and let you know what's going on. So we have Bible language tools that's actually going to be offered on Thursdays. Or actually on Saturdays this time around, starting May 29th. It's a free course. We're going to teach you how to study your Bibles, and we're going to teach you how to do this using free online tools. So go ahead and register for this very free course. We have a few other courses, including a course that Professor Onika is teaching called Back to the Text, Understanding Prophets, or excuse me, Understanding Prayer. I'm reading the next line over. Understanding Prayer. You can totally teach a class called Understanding Prophets too. But I guess that would be my job. She's teaching this course on prayer. It's a phenomenal course, and you can take this course as little as, I want to say, $45 a month, depending on the plan that you enroll in. There's a course that I'm teaching called Misreading the Prophets. This is where you get to understand the prophets of the Old Testament. It's going to be a fun course, and the prophets are super wild. I love studying them. I love talking about them, and you just never get bored. So join me there. Church Administration, which is going to be co-taught by Professor Miranda and Professor Cord. Great course there. And those are just the courses that we're offering in May. We have some courses that we're going to be offering throughout the entire summer. We offer new classes every single month. So starting in June, for example, we're going to have some additional courses like one on marketplace ministry and prophetic artistry and so forth. So please do go and check out our course registration page. Take a course with us. You will not be disappointed. You're always going to learn something. And last but not least, we do have some more informative webinars for you, including additional webinars in the prophetic or in the Presence Matters series. Forgetting the series we're on. All of the webinars are here. Our next Presence Matters series, though, is on Bible and emotional intelligence, which should be pretty fun. But we're also going to be having a webinar, a real talk webinar, which is very much like the one that we had today, where we just kind of don't bring many notes and we just kind of talk from the top of our brains. Our next one is going to be Saturday, May 29th, and we're going to be talking about virginity. You guys, it's wild what you'll probably learn about virginity and how biblical and ideal it actually is. So do come to that, share your thoughts. We will bring some Bible for you, but I imagine there'll be some early Christian texts and early Jewish texts as well that you'll get an idea to be exposed to as well. So do register for these webinars. They are free of charge, and they're super fun. So join us. Last thoughts, Professor Onika?
Yeah, last thoughts. So that Bible language tools class, I really want to emphasize the need for you guys to go ahead and sign up for that. What I've discovered over the last few years, especially like when I'm teaching Sunday school or in other places and spaces, I've realized that there are a lot of us, we love Jesus, but we don't even know what we have in front of us when we talk about the biblical text. And what I've also seen is that people are hungry to understand or to learn more about this text that we have. So finding and really being taught the proper way to study the Bible is super important, because what I've also seen is that there are a lot of people who may have gone to seminary, that are pastors, etc., and for whatever reason they withhold some of that teaching. But that's not what we do here at Amana, because we want to empower each and every one of you to be able to do what it is we believe God wants all of us to do. That is to learn of God. I know there's a scripture verse that says, "Learn of me." God invites us all into this space of learning. God invites us to the table of reason. God invites us into conversation. And in order to do that, we have to understand this text that we say God has left us. How do you do that? Come to that class. We will give you tools that you need. We will equip you for the journey, right? Because we believe the more that we are equipped, that means that the chain link is being strengthened by each link being armed and equipped with what we need, so that you can go out in there and that we can have the right conversations, that we can alter our perspective, that we can unlearn some of those toxic ideologies we've been taught, et cetera, et cetera. And I can talk about this for a long time. But come join us in that class. We're gonna have super fun. Dr. Latoya and we're going to play off of each other. I might be devil's advocate here and there. That's what I do. But we promise that you are going to walk away feeling empowered. We promise that you're going to walk away feeling as if you have what you need in order to stand up, right? And to be able to face the wiles of the enemy, so to speak. When you're armed with information, I think you can face just about anything. So we want to tell you from Amana that we love you. We appreciate you, that our classes are designed with you in mind. And we want you to come on board this caravan as we learn and we grow together. I hope you have a great weekend, great day, and come join us again for Real Talks. I promise to throw a wrench into that virginity talk too. So there you go. come join us. You don't want to miss a beat because you don't know what to expect on some days. So you don't want to miss anything. So we thank you guys for being a part of this community and continuing to give up, to endorse us by just with your presence. So have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again.
Bye, everyone.